Hello everyone. Let's take a look at some more advanced photo retouching techniques in Photoshop. Taking a look at this photograph, it obviously needs some help. It's a very old photograph. It's faded. I don't think the contrast was very good on it to begin with. It's got a color cast, it's kind of yellowed. So we've got a lot of work to do here. So I'm going to show you a few techniques that can help you not only resurrect old photographs like this, but these same techniques will work on contemporary photographs that have problems. So let's get down to it, shall we? All right. Just to review, some basic photo retouching steps are checking the resolution. Make sure that you've got the right resolution and dimensions to do the job. And oftentimes that'll come down to, where's it going? Is it a print job? Is it just going to be viewed on screen? Where is it, heading? That'll determine how much resolution, how much size you need. Another thing that you need to do, get it cropped to exactly the size that you need it to be. This one's already cropped and ready to go. You want to then adjust the tonal range, the values in the image. Make sure that you've got your shadows that are dark enough, your highlights that are bright enough, the mid-tone range is just about right. You're going to remove any color cast, like correct some color issues after that. You can target specific areas that need attention in terms of value and color as well. And then you can add, in this case in particular, there's dust and scratches on this thing, right, that are really going to need some cleanup. So we'll take a look at some healing brushes in Photoshop that'll help us do that. All right, so let's do this. Like I mentioned, anytime you get into Photoshop, first thing you probably want to do is take a look at the image size. I'm going to hit Command-Option-I or Control-Alt-I on a PC and take a look. All right, so my resolution is 150. That's not enough for a professional print job, but it is good enough for a desktop inkjet printer. If I wanted to bump this up to a resolution of 300, remember, if I take resample off and I change the resolution, say I increase it to 300, you're going to see the height and width reduce to compensate for that. Remember, this is with resampling off. But if resample is on and I jump up to 300 for the resolution, look at what happens to the file size up here, right? It was 3.7 megabytes, now it's 14.8. So the size of the file jumps dramatically. Again, not a really good idea to increase a bitmap like that. The quality of the image is going to suffer as a result. Okay, so all right. Anyway, the way that it's set, right? 5 3/4 by 10 at 150 is fine for what I'm planning to do. I'm just going to print this on a desktop printer, so it's fine. Okay, so we've made sure that we've got the right resolution and size. If I needed to crop it, I would do that now. This one's cropped, it's ready. So now we're going to turn our attention to the tonal range and adjusting values. And you've got some tools over here in your layers panel that can help you with this dramatically, some adjustment layers. And so down here at the bottom of the layers panel, remember you've got your adjustments. And the one, to be honest with you, that gives you the most flexibility is curves. And this is something that every good Photoshop artist needs to know, how to manage curves. And so basically when you add a curves adjustment layer, you get in the properties panel over here, you get this diagonal line laid over the top of a graph. And this graph shows us the values in this image, right? And here's another place where you can find that under the window menu. You can go open up your histogram, and it'll show you, a graph again of the values and colors in this image. You can see by, reading this graph that there aren't a lot of really bright highlights. There's a gap here, right? And there aren't a lot of dark darks, another gap over here. And that shows up here in our curves adjustment as well. Now, normally on an image like this, I would probably try to throw an S-curve at it, right? Basically, if you stick a point on this curve and drag it down, right? This is the area where the darks are. So I'm taking, these darks and dragging them down. It's going to darken the values in the image. And it's on a gradual curve. It's not, you're not darkening every single pixel. You're just grabbing a certain range of pixels and darkening them. And I could, up here in the highlights, I can click and drag up. This creates an S-curve, and it gives me this kind of, sharpening effect. The darks get darker, the brights get brighter. The trouble with this is that I've not really corrected the color issue yet. And this is intensifying that color cast on the image as I do it. So, this adjustment is a kind of bread and butter thing that we do in Photoshop. An S-curve is a great thing to learn how to do. It really does help your images, sharpens them up, makes them more contrasty. They really pop. But in this case, I've got a color cast. And so I want to take care of not only the values, but the color at the same time. So I'm going to, get rid of those points. If you just grab those points and drag them off, they're gone, and I could restart from there. I want you to also notice, you can drag these sliders up so that they meet the edges of your graph, and that helps increase your contrast as well. Again, very cool, but it's intensifying that color cast, which kind of makes this whole thing look kind of sickly. So again, I'm not going to do that. In fact, I'm going to just get rid of this curves adjustment layer and come back to it in a minute. I need to do a little investigation first. I've got to find out where the darkest point in this image is, the lightest point, and I need to find a middle gray value within this photograph to help me reset the values and colors. So here's how you do that. Bear with me, it's a little complex, but once you commit it to memory, it's a great tool to have. All right, so I'm going to start with another adjustment layer called threshold. Now, threshold basically reads the entire image, and again, here are my values, and this slider basically determines everything to the left of the slider is going to become black, everything to the right of the slider becomes white, right? So very dramatic. And it's kind of a cool way to create a real graphic style very quickly. But in this case, what we're going to use this for is to help us find the darkest point and the lightest point and eventually middle gray. All right, so if you drag this slider down to the left, right when you get close to the end of your graph here of values, you're going to see the darkest pixels in the entire composition. And if I look closely, there's a figure in the background of my photograph of this parade who has really dark pants. So that's the darkest spot here. Let me show you. See that? This is a figure and his pants are super dark. So what I'm going to do is get my eyedropper tool, right? I is the shortcut for eyedropper tool. And what you can do with the eyedropper tool here, let me zoom in here so you guys can see this a little better. So I for eyedropper. if you hold down the Shift key while you have the eyedropper selected, you get a little target that shows up next to your cursor. That basically, this is sampling, right? I'm basically going to put a marker by Shift clicking with the eyedropper tool. I've just set a marker on that really dark spot. So I've kind of given myself a little point to remind me where that darkest point is. Okay? So I'm going to zoom back out here. Command 0 to zoom out. Okay, so now I need to find the brightest spot in the image. So I'm going to, again, drag my slider to the right of my histogram in the Properties panel here for my threshold adjustment. And there are a couple of spots up here in the sky that are really bright. So I'm going to Shift click that spot, right? Super bright area. Okay, so now I've got to find middle gray to really do this well, but the trouble is threshold isn't designed to show me middle gray, at least not on, on its own. What I have to do is trick Photoshop into showing me middle gray. In conjunction with the threshold, I need to do a little preliminary step here. So what I'm going to do is hide the threshold adjustment layer for a minute, click back on my background layer, and I'm going to add a new layer, right? And so the shortcut for that is down here. Well, it's not a shortcut, it's a button, like the Add New Layer button. But check this out. The shortcut for that is Command Option Shift N. I do this a lot, so Command Option Shift N, or Control Alt Shift N. I know it seems like a lot, but you get used to it. Okay, so I've added a new layer. I'm going to fill that layer with medium gray, like 50% gray. So I'm going to, again, the shortcut here is Shift F5 is the shortcut to get to the fill options, right? And so I'm going to fill this new layer, like set the contents to 50% gray and click OK. There you go. This is going to help me find like middle gray in my image. So check this out. I'm going to change the blending mode of this gray layer to difference. Now the reason I'm doing that is because any image in difference mode, basically when it matches the same color in the layer underneath it, if it's the exact same color, the result that will show up will be black, right? So if you think about it, I've got a 50% gray layer. It is in difference mode over the top of my photograph. Wherever it matches 50% gray in the photograph, the result is going to be black. And so I can use threshold to find black, right? So I turn my threshold adjustment layer back on and come way down here to the dark end of my graph, my histogram. And it's showing me here, there's a flag that they're carrying in this parade, and it's got a spot here that's got a pretty good clump of gray on it. So I'm going to shift click that spot. Okay. All right. So now I've found in marker number 1, that's the darkest point in the image. Marker 2 is the brightest point, and 3 is middle gray. Okay, so I don't need the threshold adjustment layer anymore. I don't need my gray layer anymore. Here's my original photo with those targets on it. Okay, so this is the cool part. I'm going to add my curves adjustment layer now. Okay, and I'm not going to mess around with the curve itself, although I might later. I want to call your attention to these 3 eyedroppers on the left side of the Properties panel now. So the top one is to set the black point in the image, right? The middle one is gray and this one is white. Okay, so we've got our markers set. All we have to do is line these up. Now, here's a little bit of extra information. If you want to help yourself, if you're doing printing, it helps if you set the ink levels a little, different from these presets. So I'm going to double click the black eyedropper first. And so it brings up the color picker and it says target shadow color, right? And so this is an RGB image. And so I'm looking at my RGB settings. And if R, G, and B are exactly the same number, that's going to be a neutral. There's no color. It's going to be black or white or gray, okay? And so I've set, instead of zeros, like when you do this on your machine, you're going to see zeros here. So that's absolute black. But I want you to set it to 10, right? Like this. And you'll notice over here that it moves the color picker off of absolute black to a very, very, very dark gray. Okay? The reason I'm doing this is because if you go to print something and it's absolute black, a lot of times the dot pattern on the print will be just flooded with ink and it won't look right. So if you bump that up a little bit, it's going to help. Now it's going to ask you, do you want to save these as the target defaults? And you're going to say yes, unless you want to have to reset those every time that you do this. All right, so middle gray, I'm going to double click that one, set that to 133. Okay. And for the white, instead of 255, set it to 244, right? So not absolutely white, just a very, very light gray, again, so that you get an even dot pattern running throughout the image. It just helps a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to start with the dark eyedropper, right? The black point, the shadow target. And I'm going to come over here. Remember, number 1, let me zoom in again. Number 1 is my darkest spot. So what I'm going to do to help me out here is turn the caps lock key on. Some of you may have inadvertently turned the caps lock key on and discovered that it gives you a target instead of the icon for your cursor, right? And so instead of the eyedropper, I get a precise cursor. And since my targets are look like that precise cursor, I'm going to turn caps lock on to help me target just that right spot. So when I click it, see how it reset all the values, and those darks, instead of being kind of in the middle and washed out, are now deeper and darker, right? And again, that's the issue with this photograph, is that it was kind of, everything was in the middle, no dark darks, no bright highlights. Okay, so now I'm gonna skip gray and go to the white eyedropper, right? Bring that over to number 2. That was the second one we did, was white. So I'm going to click there. Now those kind of washed out midtones become brighter. And then finally, I'm going to zoom out for this one. The middle gray eyedropper, if there's any remaining, color casts, this should usually knock them out. That middle gray, when I click on this spot, you'll see it neutralize any remaining kind of color cast. It's pretty dramatic, right? And just take a look at that, like, before and after. It's pretty dramatic, right? So one last thing here before we move on. In fact, I'm going to pause this and I'll pick it up in part 2. But just so that you know, if you don't want to have to look at these targets anymore, if they've served their purpose and you want to get rid of them so you don't have to look at them, come over to your toolbox And nestled within the eyedropper tool group is the color sampler tool, right? And that's what these are, color samples. So you can come up here to the control panel and hit clear all, and they'll go away. All right. So there you go. That's part one. Join me for part two, will you? Okay.